What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jay Rich, back to bring you week 9 waivers in the NFL for fantasy football. Let's just dive straight into it because this week is going to be a tough one. There is 6 teams on bye: the Browns, the Cowboys, the Broncos, the 49ers, the Steelers, and the Giants. Not the worst teams to have on bye. We are coming off the Chiefs and Chargers on bye, so a lot of players we start in on those two teams. But a lot of players means less options on the waiver wire and more players on bye for us in fantasy. Now, obviously, the biggest ones probably being the Cowboys, the Broncos, the 49ers. You do have Saquon Barkley on bye, which is going to be tough. And there's just not a lot out there for the running back position. But let's start with running back. And let's start with the guy that I disparaged on this very program a few weeks ago. And that is Falcons running back Tyler Allgeier. Allgeier is finally through his tough stretch, and we saw him come together for a really good game against the Carolina Panthers. Now, the big thing with Allgeier here, he's only about 30-40% owned, and he did get dropped. I know he did in a couple leagues when he really struggled over that tough stretch like I mentioned. But now this dude's schedule is wide open. Chargers, Panthers, Bears, Commanders, Steelers to close out the rest of the regular season. Then he goes on bye on week 14, which really sucks if you are counting on him. You will not have him for the first week of your playoffs, more likely than not. But Allgeier has been heavily involved in the passing game. He's been getting it done on the ground. And with this much easier stretch of games, I expect Allgeier to be good. So he's definitely my number one running back pick up on waivers. I think he is a guy that can get it done for you and be a flex option, especially on some of these bye weeks and these tougher weeks that we have going ahead. And in a week like this where we have a lot of running backs on bye, you could do a lot worse than Tyler Allgeier. He's probably going to be an RB2, at worst an RB3. There's just too many guys on bye. He's probably going to end up an RB2, probably even with some RB1 upside this week against the Chargers, who we know are really bad against the run. Now let's get into a deeper option, and I mean really deep here. I'm looking at Dontrell Hilliard, the backup running back for the Tennessee Titans. He had 80 yards this week against the Houston Texans. Now, he's not going to do that this coming week. This week on Sunday Night Football, they play the Chiefs. So the Titans, who did miss Ryan Tannehill this week, and this is where this argument kind of falls apart. If Tannehill is not in this game for whatever reason, he was sick this week. He was also nursing an ankle injury. They really didn't need him against the Texans, so I'm not surprised that he got held out. And he was sick, so he didn't travel with the team. So the issue is that if he doesn't play, though, I don't think you can play Hilliard, and maybe you can, but I don't want to play Hilliard because I don't trust Malik Willis to get him the ball. Now, Hilliard is kind of the third down back, the pass-catching back for the Tennessee Titans, and that's the main reason why, if you are desperate, and I mean desperate, this is deep type of stuff, but on a week with all these running backs on bye and potentially bad matchups across the board, I think you could do a lot worse than Hilliard, who will be the RB2 for the Tennessee Titans. He does catch passes out of the backfield. It sounds disgusting, but the Chiefs are still one of the worst defenses in the NFL against pass-catching running backs, and so whether it's Derrick Henry out of the backfield or Dontrell Hilliard, I think there is some opportunities for some dump-offs, some screens. I'm not saying it's pretty, but you could do a lot worse than Dontrell Hilliard, in my opinion. He was heavily involved this week. I think he will have to be next week. They're just devoid of pass catchers in Tennessee, and that's the biggest problem, is that they have Robert Woods. Hopefully, Treylon Burks can come back. He may be a guy you consider picking up as well, and he's not in my main list for wide receivers, but he's a guy you could consider. Coming off IR is really where that kind of falls apart. We don't know what his usage will look like, but Hilliard, I think, will have to be involved. They can't just run through Robert Woods. They need to add other guys on this offense, and Hilliard has shown the ability to not just run, but also catch the football out of the backfield as well. And so I think that's why he could be an option in some very deep leagues, and why there are worse starts. And I talked about Jaylen Warren 2 weeks ago, and Jaylen Warren this past week was decent, right? He caught some pass out of the backfield. He's not a guy you want to start every week, but when there's very limited options, he's a guy you can turn to. I think that Hilliard is potentially that guy this week. Obviously, Jaylen Warren on bye with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So let's dive into the wide receiver position now and start with the top of the list. I think he has to be number one. If he's not owned in your league yet, he definitely should be, and that is Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer, who has been a little bit banged up this season, hasn't had the best year so far, should be stepping into the wide receiver 2 role behind Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen, who we hope he's healthy. We have to kind of project that 100% health for Keenan Allen coming off the bye week, having now 2 weeks since his last game to kind of finally get back. They need a wide receiver 1, and it should be Keenan Allen, but the wide receiver 2 role is very much up for grabs. Mike Williams, we know, will be out. We expect it to be Josh Palmer, maybe see some DeAndre Carter. We will probably see a lot of Austin Eckler, but the main reason why he's number 1 pickup, they have the Atlanta Falcons this week. And the Atlanta Falcons are the worst team against opposing wide receivers. We saw what DJ Moore did to them this week. We've seen what teams have done to them all season long. And Justin Herbert should honestly have a field day against this Atlanta Falcons defense. So that's the big thing here is not only do you have Justin Herbert, not only do you have a wide open wide receiver 2 spot, but Josh Palmer should be the guy to fill that void and has at times in the past. So while he can be more of a slot option, and that has been Keenan Allen's role, I do believe there's a world where he does have a great week, especially against this Falcons defense. And with obviously Justin Herbert throwing the ball, he needs to get on track as well. And Josh Palmer is my number 1 wide receiver pickup for the week. The other guy I'm looking at is Devin Duvernay, the wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. No one likes to play Duvernay, but at the end of the day, he continues to get it done for us in fantasy football. He scores a lot of touchdowns, and that's the reason why he gets ranked a little bit higher than some. And the biggest thing here is that he continues to be heavily involved. A lot of people early on said, oh, it's a fluke, he can't score all these touchdowns, but this week he ran for a touchdown. We'll see the availability of the top pass catchers for the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews left and was banged up. Now you also have Rashad Bateman potentially still re-aggravating that foot injury. So we don't know what it's going to look like for Baltimore. They face the Saints this week, who have been awful against the pass. Now maybe they got it going this week against the Raiders, but Baltimore should be much better. We know the Saints really struggle versus running quarterbacks. We saw what Marcus Mariota did to them and some other rushing quarterbacks. Kyler Murray as well had a pretty good game against them. But the big thing here is that Lamar Jackson's going to run. Gus Edwards, we'll see the status of him. Justice Hill, Kenyon Drake, like you could pick up those guys, but it's just, we don't know who the guy is going to be. And on top of that, the Saints were pretty stout this week against the run. I think they're going to have to pass, whether it's Demarcus Robinson, who did have a good week this week, or Devin Duvernay. I think I trust Duvernay a little bit more. His time in the system, his ability and his target share in the red zone, the way they utilize him in the red zone, he's the guy that's probably more likely than Demarcus Robinson to get a touchdown. I think that's the guy you want to target off of waivers. But like I mentioned, if you did want to go deeper leagues, Demarcus Robinson, not a bad option, because again, he did see a ton of work this past Thursday Night Football. And there's a world where I think people kind of forget that happened, right? No one wanted to be Demarcus Robinson getting the ball, but he did, and he did just fine. And so that's the reason why I think both him and Duvernay are options from the wide receiver position. And with that easy matchup against the Saints, I don't mind starting either of them at all as terms of flex positions, just because there's a lot of guys on bye this week. And so you will have to kind of pick and choose where you want these guys to fit in. I think they are viable options on the waiver wire this week. And then guys that are going on bye that I still like a lot, well, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who plays tonight, talked about him almost every week because no one wants to pick him up. We'll see what he does tonight. But again, if you do have the flexibility to maybe pick somebody up, Deshaun Watson is coming back. Like, he will be back in week 12. We're already at week 9. It's time to start preparing for that a little bit. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, if he has one big game with Watson, will be a big pickup and has been flex viable for a couple of weeks. Not the biggest ceiling, hasn't been scoring touchdowns, but he is getting solid volume as the wide receiver 2 in that offense. And that's why I think he is worth a potential stash pickup. And then I mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson, who didn't have the greatest week this week for the Giants, but going into the bye week, I expect him to kind of be reinvigorated into the offense. They come back out firing again. The Giants do have not good offense, but it's a fine offense, and Daniel Jones has been good so far this season. I expect Wan'Dale to kind of take a step forward coming off the bye. We've seen this in the past with rookie wide receivers. Wide receivers coming off of bye, especially rookies, tend to take a step forward when they are heavily involved in the offense. I think they will do their best in New York to get him more heavily involved in the offense. And that's why I think that going after Wan'Dale Robinson, if you do have that kind of flexibility, isn't a bad option, because he could be a really good player for you down the stretch. So let's get into the tight end position. I think Greg Dulcich has to be number 1 on everyone's list. Led the Denver Broncos in receiving this week, been the number 2 option behind Jerry Jeudy, and only continues to be a larger part of this offense. I really like Greg Dulcich. I think you could do a lot worse than him. Not a ton to love from the tight end position, but at the end of the day, you have to start somebody, and you could do a lot worse than Dulcich. Russell Wilson seems to have his eyes all over Dulcich in the middle of the field, so I do like him as a pickup. And then going back to the Baltimore Ravens yet again, Isaiah Likely is a guy who could be a decent option. The only issue here is that the Saints are very good against the tight end position. They're much worse against wide receivers. So Likely isn't the best option, but with Mark Andrews banged up, Rashad Bateman banged up, we don't know who's going to be the starter, who's going to be in, who's going to be out. Isaiah Likely led the team in receiving this past week and scored a touchdown. He operates as more of a wide receiver, has more of a wide receiver body type, plays wide receiver more in in this Baltimore Ravens offense. So it's kind of difficult to say, well, the Saints are good against the tight end, but they're facing Isaiah Likely, who kind of plays wide receiver. So it's difficult to make that direct comp, but I do think it's, like I mentioned, it's a good matchup. And so that's the reason why you want to kind of go after that one. And Likely, if for some reason he's the tight end one on this offense, you want to start him this week, because even though he's got low ownership and people aren't really in quite yet, he could be a guy that quickly rises as a guy you want to start this week, even in not the best matchup on paper, because I think he will play more outside and play in the slot than people realize, because he's playing more of a wide receiver role on this Baltimore Ravens offense. Now, going into QB streamers of the week, I have two that I do kind of like, and the biggest one right now is Trevor Lawrence. He's going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, who just got slapped 24-0 by the New Orleans Saints. Now, Lawrence has been okay at best. He's been struggling a little bit, but the biggest thing here is that the Vegas Raiders do not play well against the slot. We know that Christian Kirk will play out of the slot, and I expect a big game from him against Las Vegas. If Trevor Lawrence can find him early and often, use Travis Etienne in the rushing game, and then as well maybe run in a touchdown instead of throwing picks in the red zone, that would be great for us. I think Trevor Lawrence is a fine stream this week, and you could do a lot worse than him. And then as well, Taylor Heinike. Taylor Heinike has been surprisingly good, and I expect him to be okay this week. They play Minnesota. Minnesota played fine against Kyler Murray, and so I think that he is startable. He's been averaging about 19 fantasy points per game as a starter, which not bad for Taylor Heinike. Been playing pretty well. So I think if you're a little desperate, you're a little bit unsure, I think you do a lot worse than Taylor Heinike. He's been showing us every week that he's been just fine. And while he gets a little shaky at times, he hasn't been that bad. And I think you could start him against the Vikings. The Vikings defense is middle of the pack. They believe are 10th in the NFL to fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So it's not bad. Not the best matchup. Trevor Lawrence's is a lot better, in my opinion. And that's why he's kind of the number one. Heinike more of a number two. But that's just kind of how I see it this week. It's going to be tough. Not a lot of options out there. But honestly, the big thing, not a lot of injuries either, which is good because we're tired of our star players getting injured and having to find players to replace them. So kind of going over what I discussed, quick recap. Tyler Allgeier, number one pickup at running back, followed by, maybe Justice Hill, Kenyon Drake, depending on the status of Gus Edwards, then Dontrell Hilliard as a deep pickup for the Tennessee Titans with the matchup against the Chiefs. I think the matchup is good, and he could be startable depending on your league format. Like I mentioned, more of a deeper play, or if you're really desperate, because I think he will catch passes out of the backfield. And big caveat, Ryan Tannehill has to be the starter. If he's not, then do not play Dontrell Hilliard. At wide receiver, Joshua Palmer is number one with Mike Williams being out. We'll see a lot of Austin Eckler and likely Keenan Allen, but Josh Palmer can really fill that wide receiver 2 role, and that's why I like him a lot against the Falcons this week. Then Devin Duvernay against the Saints potentially could be the wide receiver 1, even with Mark Andrews potentially out, and we'll see the status of him, and Rashad Bateman dealing with the foot injury as well. I still like Donovan Peoples-Jones and Wan'Dale Robinson. At tight end, Greg Dulcich and Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely more for the 1 week matchup and the potential injuries to the starting receiver and tight end. And then Greg Dulcich could be a long-term play. That's why I like him a little bit more. So I would definitely target Dulcich. He's been the second highest targeted receiver this week and led the Denver Broncos in receiving. And then at streaming quarterback, Trevor Lawrence number 1 and Taylor Heinike number 2. So those are your week 9 waivers in the NFL for fantasy football, and I will see you guys later. Make sure you drop me a like and subscribe for future content. Good luck this week. Good luck with your waivers. Don't overspend too much. I'm not loving the situation, but maybe if you want to go after Allgeier, I think the schedule is really good to where you could be afforded to do that. The rest, I'd probably throw a couple bucks on here or there. Not any must pickups, but more so spot starts, fill-ins for the bye weeks. Those are the kind of ways I'm looking at these guys right now. $5 or so, depending on how much money you have left. $1 here, $2 there, just to kind of fill you through some of these bye weeks, because there are a lot of guys on bye this week. So good luck, like, subscribe. I'll see you guys next week, and I'm out. Peace.